Hi there, this is Dr. Moyer, and this is the PowerPoint lecture on Piaget's theory of cognitive development. I apologize for getting this up so late. I don't even have an excuse. I could give you excuses, but it's just been a very busy semester, let's just say that. So that's why I put off you submitting your Piaget assignment. I wanted you to be able to hear my explanation before you turn that in. So Piaget, I'm sure that you guys have heard of him before. He's pretty well known in the child development literature. He was born in Switzerland in 1896 and he died in 1980. He was pretty amazing. Published his first article at the age of 10, which is crazy. And he started studying children in about 1920 in Paris. He wanted to learn about how children learn. He was very interested in that, so he developed his own open-ended interview. I apologize, that's my doggy in the background shaking. It's always hard to avoid these home sounds. If I lock them out, they get upset. So, okay, back to the PowerPoint. So Piaget wanted to suspend his own adult ideas and what he had learned about how children think and how they learn to think. And he went about studying this in a different way. He found in his observations that children younger than 7 years old think in a very different way about dreams, about morals, and other topics. In 1925, his first child was born, Jacqueline, and this gave him the opportunity to study children constantly. In today's scientific world, it probably wouldn't fly observing your own children for research, but it did at this time. So he started observing Jacqueline and he interviewed his own children as they all were born and grown up. And his methodology, it could be classified as qualitative, but it was a little different than what we would do today. Again, we wouldn't have our own children as the subjects. Clearly, that's not ethical and crosses a lot of boundaries. However, he did again. When he conducted his observations and interviews, he would oftentimes change his questions. And he didn't compute statistics. He was interested in the rich, detailed examples of children's thinking. And so he didn't have like a standardized interview structure that he used every time. He would change things around. Ultimately, he just wanted to understand. But psychologists object to Piaget's methodology, and that is one of the major criticisms of his work. So the overview of the theory. I've tried to make this as simple as possible because I realize it can be a little overwhelming, but it's really not if you think about it. So I'm going to, again, try to make it easy. The overview of the theory is that there are 4 periods. The sensorimotor intelligence period, which is from birth to 2 years. PreOperational thought, which is from 2 years to 7. Concrete operations from 7 to 11. And then formal operations from 11 into adulthood. Some of the major things, if you want to scratch in your notes, during the sensorimotor intelligence period, one of the major, I guess I would call it a task or accomplishments that babies have to demonstrate before they are thought of in their pre-operational thought period is object permanence. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but basically it's the idea that an object is there even if you cover it with a blanket. Babies, when they understand that it's still there and they know to look for it when it's covered, or they look for it wherever it last was. So say it was behind a wall, for example, then they're demonstrating that they understand and are ready to move on. Not that it's like a a phase where they're sitting there waiting to move on and you're giving them the okay. But that's supposed to indicate that they are finished with that particular period. Period 2, in your notes, add magical thinking. Piaget did a lot of energy conservation tests at this time to see if children could handle them. And it's not till the end of this period, closer to 7 years, that they're able to accomplish this. They also, some other big ideas for this period, they're very egocentric. And it's not, he was very clear to point out they're not selfish, but it's very difficult for them to take the view of the other. So it's hard for them to understand that children at this age, that you can't see their dreams. They think you can. And so, yes, it's all about me, but not in a bad way. And then assimilation, also a big concept for period 2. That is when children make everything fit into one big category. When they get to period 3, the concrete operations, they break their ideas, break into more categories, and that's called accommodation. Right now, they're just kind of making everything fit. Also, for concrete operations, they accomplish logical thinking, and so they can handle the energy conservation tasks. And then formal operations, the big accomplishment, of course, is abstract thinking. Being able to think abstractly to solve like math word problems, or to think about ideas for like making change or prevention programs. They're able to think logically about what could possibly happen. They don't have to be just thinking only of the realistic ideas. Okay, so that's the overview. So let's talk about period 1, the sensorimotor intelligence period. Again, this begins from birth and goes to about 2 years of age. It's important to note, though, that it's not like when children reach exactly 2 years that you say, oh, they're done, they're into the next period. They have to demonstrate particular reflexes, which we'll talk about, that indicate they are moving on or learning. I don't know how else to put that. It's not until stage 6, again, the beginning of thoughts and object permanence, that's what indicates the end of this period. So it's all about reflexes. From birth to about 1 month, babies show the sucking reflex, the rooting reflex. They will suck on anything, fingers, blankets, toys. Of course, the reflex prepares them to nurse from a mother's breast. And so they also engage in a rooting reflex, where they will search with their mouth to put something in their mouth. So if you put a baby near the mother's breast, and maybe the baby's mouth isn't exactly at the nipple, the baby will root around looking for the nipple. You start to see evidence of the baby learning to adjust their head and lip movements to find the breast or the bottle on their own towards the end of about 1 month, toward the end of this stage. And then stage 2, from 1 to 4 months, we have what Piaget called primary circular reactions. And this is when the baby, just by chance, tries something new and enjoys it and tries it again. They try to copy and make things happen again, but it's all about within themselves. So that's why it's primary circular reactions. So thumb sucking. They may find that thumb sucking is very soothing and enjoy it, and maybe their thumb just made it into their mouth. They don't really know how, and they'll continue to try to do that again. But it looks like, as they're learning, they're trying all these movements to put that together to get the thumb to the mouth. It's only when the baby learns to coordinate the movement after repeated failures that they have mastered primary circular reactions. Stage 3 from 4 to 8 months, secondary circular reactions. The baby now notices things outside of himself. So he may notice that if he drops his rattle, mother or caregiver or siblings, whoever's around, will pick it back up. And so he continues to drop it. And I'm giggling because we've all seen the classic, baby dropping the toy, then looking down, waiting for someone to pick it back up, and then they just keep dropping it. And it can be annoying if it goes on for a long period of time. But if you realize what's happening, the baby is learning about movements and trying to make things happen outside of themselves. So they might, slap a ball and it moves, and they realize, that ball moves. And they'll try to move it again, but they may not repeat that exact movement. They're kind of clumsy again, learning this. And then when they finally master it, that's when they figure out if they put pressure on the ball that it will move, then they've mastered stage 3. Remember the rattle thing that I just mentioned? Just think about it as the baby enjoying their own power to make things happen. The act isn't meant to irritate, of course. It's just amazing for the baby when they first realize they can make this happen. And that's why they're so delighted. Okay, stage 4 from 8 to 12 months. This is what Piaget called the coordination of secondary schemes. And now this means that the baby is able to coordinate more than one movement. So before it's always just been one movement. Now there are several. Piaget talks about the classic example that he provides for this is that he places a matchbox on the floor. Laurent wants it, his child, and goes to grab it, but Piaget puts his hand in the way. And Laurent does not like that and gets upset, shakes himself, shakes his head no, waves his hands around, and eventually gives up. But Piaget keeps placing the matchbox on the floor and putting his hand in the way to see what Laurent will do. And after several attempts, or even days of this, Laurent struck Piaget's hand, and he moved his hand away, so Laurent was able to obtain the matchbox. And so Piaget says they start to understand that they can coordinate different movements and even things outside of themselves, and even what he called anticipating events that could happen. And that's when he masters that. That's when he's moved on to stage 5. They may also try to coordinate somebody else's movements. So let's say the baby wants to watch cartoons and understands the cartoons come on TV, but doesn't understand how to turn it on and make the cartoon happen. He may take his mom's hand and try to put it on the remote because he anticipates and understands that the remote will turn on the TV, but he doesn't know how to operate it. So and another example is baby preferring bananas to peas. So you have these 2 bowls of food, peas and bananas, and the baby opens up her mouth when she sees bananas coming, but not when she sees peas coming. So she's starting to anticipate that she's going to like the taste of bananas, but not maybe peas so much. The stage 5, 12 to 18 months, tertiary circular reactions. So babies have this natural intrinsic curiosity of the world, meaning that's its own reward. They just want to learn, explore, they're taking in information, a lot of brain development occurring. And they learn from experience. Piaget actually said they're like little scientists. They conduct small experiments, see what will happen, and then learn from the experience. So you may find that when you put the baby in the tub to have his or her nightly bath, and they put their hand in the water as it's running, they'll see that if they move their hand, the water will change direction. This is very delightful to them, and they'll continue to do this, to place their hand in and watch how it changes the water, because they're learning that their movements can do that. Okay. This stage 6, so 18 months to 2 years, is the beginning of thought. And now Piaget says, from what he observed, that children appear to be thinking about situations before they actually act. Before they were just experimenting, acting, trial and error. Oftentimes things would happen by mistake, but they would repeat it till they mastered it. Now they are actually seen to be thinking. And he called this internal mental exploration. He says that you can see the child, before you could see the child's thinking process, and you could follow it, because you could watch, if I put my hand this way in the water goes this way, and you can watch that occur. But at the beginning of thought, the thinking now becomes internal. And so you may see a baby pushing a carriage, comes to a wall, stops, looks at the wall, turns around, pulls the carriage, realizes it's not as easy to pull as it was to push, and may stop and go around to the other side of the carriage to push from that side. So they're pushing again, which is really quite amazing when you think about it. So they've solved that problem. The thinking occurred inside their mind, and the evidence of it is seeing them make accommodations or make changes after pausing to think about it. So they're not just trying repeatedly and slamming things around. They actually stop, and you can see them thinking, which is pretty cool. And again, the big deal is object permanence here. So Piaget found that eventually his children were able to determine that when he hid a ball under the blanket, it wasn't gone forever, that it was actually under the blanket, that the object still existed. The object was permanent and not fleeting, and they got that it was under the blanket and would move the blanket to find it. And that's what he called object permanence. Okay, moving right along. Periods 2 and 3, pre-operational and concrete operational thought. Pre-operational is from 2 years to 7. About, again, it's a rough, not an exact estimate. And then concrete operations from 7 to 11. And it's only when the child has achieved object permanence that they are ready to move on. They start to understand the use of symbols and start using toys and objects to symbolize various things in their play. So I think about my niece Bella, and when she came to visit me the first time, I had a shed that had in the front of it, it wasn't a porch, but it was like a wooden, I don't even know what I'd call it. It wasn't even a step, just wood laid down in front of it, so you weren't in the grass anymore, and it had kind of a bar around at the top to hold on to. Well, she immediately took this over and called this her house. And she wasn't referring to the shed, she was referring to that wooden area in the front. And people could visit, like we'd have to go and pretend we were knocking, and it was this really cool play and quite imaginative. And that's a good example of a symbol. So the shed's front entryway symbolized a house for her. They also, many children like to pretend to go night-night. So they might put a towel on the floor, a blanket on the floor, or a pillow from the couch, and that symbolizes the bed, and they pretend that they're going to bed. So again, learning the use of symbols. Still egocentric. They consider everything from their point of view. And again, that doesn't imply selfishness or conceit. Only the inability, the cognitive inability to consider anything from others' point of view. So a good example of this is getting gifts for mother or for father. A child may pick out a Matchbox car for their Mother's Day gift for their mother, and this makes perfect sense to a 4-year-old because, hey, I like Matchbox cars, so of course mother is going to like it too. They don't quite understand that not everybody has the same likes as they do. At this point also, play is singular. You've probably observed this among children. They tend to play alongside one another with toys, with games, whatever, but they don't coordinate and play together. Not yet. Signs that they're overcoming egocentrism is when they do start playing with others, using symbols and imagination and coordinating their play. So if they start playing house together and say, you be the mom, and I'll be the dad, and you're the child, this is our house, then that becomes, you realize as the observer that the child's no longer egocentric. Okay, moral judgment. Up to the age of 7, children may not necessarily follow rules or even understand that there's only one winner, say a game. Up to about the age of 10, they're not sure. They start to get that there are rules, but they don't understand really who makes those rules. If you ask them, they might say God or some authority figure, the government, the president. Somebody made the rules, but it was somebody really big and in power. And then after about the age of 10, Piaget says they start to understand that rules can be changed and made together, and that they can be mutually agreed upon. So if they start playing with other children, they may establish their own rules or change existing rules. And so before age 10, they're kind of blindly following any rule, but after age 10, they establish autonomy and can start making their own judgment about rules and changing them. And then also during pre-operational thought, everything is animated. So trucks breathe, clouds can be sad, a swing set can be happy. So they tend to animate everything around them. Okay, and then blending the two periods, so it's not completely clear when they change, but when scientific reasoning starts occurring, that's a good sign that they're into concrete operations. And Piaget described this as scientific reasoning concerning conservation of liquid numbers and classification. So the classic Piaget experiment is having a tall glass of holding liquid and then a short, wider glass holding liquid, and they're both holding the same amount of liquid, but children don't have the ability to understand that yet. They can't grasp that and learn that. Even if you show them and dump water from one glass to the other and they see that no water's been added, no water's been taken away, they really can't quite grasp it until 3 things happen. When they realize you haven't added more water, they realize the glass is taller and that one is wider, but that they are the same because if you pour the liquid back and forth, it will be the same. When they have mastered these 3 things, and Piaget called this conservation of liquid concept, and he said identity is when you haven't added more water, they realize this. Compensation is when they realize that one glass is taller and the other is wider, but that they are probably the same, and that if you actually pour the liquid back and forth, you'll see that they're the same, and that's called inversion. The conservation of numbers you could have two rows of objects, the same number of objects, but if you have one stretched out and spaced more between the objects than the other, children will say that one's bigger. When they have mastered conservation numbers, they start to realize they're the same because they have the same number of objects despite the length. So stretching it out wouldn't fool them anymore. And then the classification, the experiment that Piaget used for this was he had 20 beads. All of them are wooden, 18 of them are brown, 2 are white. When he asked children, are there more brown beads or are there more wooden beads? At the pre-operational level, they respond that there's more brown beads. They start to, they're into concrete operations when they understand that all of them are wooden and there's actually more wooden beads. As far as dreams, children think dreams are real. They believe that other people can see their dreams like they can. Evidence that they have moved into concrete operations is when they start to understand that dreams are not real and that they're the only ones that see them. And so, it makes sense why dreams are so scary when children are very young if they think they're real. When they start to grasp it that they're not real and that you can't see them as a parent or caregiver, then that's evidence of concrete operations. Finally, we have the fourth period, or formal operations, and Piaget described this as occurring between 11 years of age into adulthood. And this is the big thing here, of course, is abstract thinking. Children are able to think like true scientists, so they can hypothesize, they can abstractly come up with various outcomes, and then they can actually test this. And they understand and can process math word problems. They can examine multiple possible explanations for outcomes. They can start to think about far-reaching problems like global warming, liberty, justice, conservation, protection of the planet's resources, etc. And Piaget would say that's why you see a lot of adolescents active in various causes like that, because they understand them and they get the importance of that. And that's a way to appeal to the type of thinking that they're mastering. They enjoy it. The adolescent basically becomes a dreamer and thinks that their ideas can conquer the world. And this is ever so present when parents start, or caregivers start arguing with their adolescent about who is right. The parent, of course, or caregiver would say, I'm 40, I've lived through this, I know this is going to happen. And the adolescent is, you don't know me, I'm different, you don't know what I'm going to do. And really it's a factor of their brain development. They really do believe that their ideas are the only ones. And sometimes they're right. Some adolescents actually are able to think really, sorry, that was my phone, in a complex manner, and they can solve problems that older adults are not able to. They also become egocentric again, but not like when they were little children. They understand others' perspectives and points of view, but they really are more about their own point of view. And they think that everyone is concerned with them and staring at them and judging them. When adolescents are able to take on adult roles and learn the limits and resistances to their own thoughts and actions, that's when they overcome egocentrism, according to Piaget. Okay. So some theoretical issues to Piaget. The stage concept does not leave a lot of room for variability. It implies that all children from all cultures develop in the same manner, but there's actually evidence that, of course, different cultures have different morals and different rules, and even ideas about dreams, so some of these would vary. The implications for education, Piaget would say true learning comes from the child-centered. That children, they learn through the process of spontaneous invention and discovery. The teachers should make materials available to children, much like Montessori, so that the children can explore on their own, and teachers should not impose their own knowledge on the child. But Piaget did place a great deal of emphasis on social interaction, particularly with peers their own age. He said that facilitated natural learning. So it's not that he didn't believe in social interaction. It's important to realize, because sometimes he gets criticized for that. An evaluation of Piaget's work. Has research supported his ideas? Well, the bulk of the research that focuses on the sensorimotor period has actually confirmed the theory that it is really hard to teach conservation until children are of a certain age and they want to or are ready to learn about it. So that's interesting. And his sequences seem to have support. He implied more consistency to development only occurring in stages, but there is evidence that there's more variability to that. However, the sequence appears to be important, so that order is important. And not everyone reaches the last one, formal operations. Not everyone reaches that stage. It may be more context specific. So it's possible for a mechanic to be able to apply formal operations on troubleshooting a car, but not when thinking about like philosophy. And that's what he means by, or we mean by, more context specific. Children do seem to fare better when they're self-motivated to learn on their own, and we don't try to force learning on them. And research has shown that forcing learning has not been super effective. So there appears to be quite a bit of support for Piaget's ideas, and that's why we continue to talk about them and apply them today. Oops. Oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to end that quick. But that is the end of the PowerPoint on Piaget. I hope that this helps with your projects, helps you understand and be able to think about the case from Piaget's point of view. So there's lots of other resources on Piaget that you're welcome to utilize, but I wanted you guys to be able to have the benefit of this talk. Okay, that's all.